wherever you are, whenever you are, you're very welcome here to the Clear Truth live show media extravaganza / chat with friends. We like to call it here the CTML. I'm not going to try and do the acronym. I think that would be a tough acronym. What do you think, guys? I don't know that would work well.
I don't know. I think we like tough acronyms in today's world. I can think of one that just keeps getting longer.
What's that? Oh, yeah, we can add in plus signs and two S's and all of that. There we go. Yeah, great. Okay, well there we go.
We can call this Clear Truth Plus. There it is.
Thank you. That was much simpler than Jamie's.
Yeah. 3 spirits. Because two-spirit thing. There's I don't know. Anyway, you're very welcome, everybody. If you're watching this on the other side of the election, congratulations or enjoy the apocalypse. So we are going to be talking. We're joined very graciously today by Keith Foskey, who is one of our writers here at Clear Truth and does many other things. And he's also representing his merch. You can follow him at Your Calvinist. Yes. Is that the same on YouTube, your channel as well? Are you Your Calvinist at all points?
Yeah, and just to say, I'm not a totally vain individual. My wife bought me this shirt. She is so supportive of everything I do. So she got me this for Christmas last year, and I wear it a lot because it is nice to when you go places like to conferences, people know you by your name, sometimes not by your face. So.
Yeah, very good. Yes. Well, I have merch that has my thing on it, and I bought that myself. Okay, my wife is definitely needs to be more supportive and buy me my own stuff anyway. So you're very welcome, and also as always joining us, Steven Whitlow. Do you want to say hi, Steven, and tell people who you are?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Steven. I'm the director of Clear Truth. Here's the deal. Today I went to vote. I early voted. I was in line for 75 minutes. That was crazy. I've never early voted. I've early voted one time, and it was like 35 seconds. I've never seen anything like this. So if you're a Christian and you're on our side, go and vote. And make sure you give yourself plenty of time. If you're not on our side, there's no election. Don't worry about it. Just stay home. Completely forget everything I just said.
Yeah, as they say, if you want to win an election, vote early, vote often. That's the way to do it. Speaking of election and your Calvinist T-shirt, Keith, putting it all together wonderfully. We're talking today about the Protestant Reformation. What with the fact that it's kind of what's known as Reformation Day. It was Reformation Sunday on Sunday past there. And this is, I think, an interesting topic, and it's one that's evolving ever so slightly because I think in our sort of post-Christian, anti-Christian world, one of the things we're seeing that conservative Catholics and conservative Protestants are bumping into each other more often than they might have done historically. And that does raise some interesting questions, some important questions for us as believers. And I'll give one example, and then we're going to play a quick video and we can get stuck in and respond to it. But one of the first actual big name to ever notice any of my stuff that I'm aware of anyway, whenever I started putting videos on the internet, was Matt Fradd, who is Pints with Aquinas. It was his YouTube channel, and he's a well-known Catholic YouTuber. Again, he's a very conservative Catholic and speaks very well on a lot of cultural issues. He actually just had Andrew Clavin on his channel recently, and he spoke brilliantly to Andrew Clavin about homosexuality being sin, which Clavin doesn't really hold to. Really, really smart. And he was doing a thing in Belfast. He reposted some of my stuff, which really helped me because my channel was going nowhere at that point in time, and was very positive about it. And he was doing an event in Belfast, so I decided to go along and just say thank you. And I'm Protestant by total conviction, and I sort of knew what I was getting into, but didn't fully know. I was like, this is going to be quite Catholic, but I don't know what that means. So I went along. And I thoroughly enjoyed what he said. He talked about culture, and he gave a gospel message which in many ways would have not seemed out of place in a lot of places, although I think with a couple of key points where we'd go, okay, that's different. But what really struck me was number one, the response. So he gave 2 messages. One of them was a gospel message, and at the end there was no call to repentance and faith. there was a call to go and have confession right now. There are priests in the room, and go to confession, or come and venerate an icon of Jesus. There was also prayers to Mary and a statue of Mary, and I was like, oh, well, I mean, I really like what he's saying, but also this seems pretty, from my perspective, pretty blasphemous, and I don't like it all that much. And I would say that to him, and I think he would accept that, and I think he'd want me to accept that, because he's a good faith guy. So we really do need to figure out some of this stuff. There was a sort of semi-viral clip from Jeff Durbin a while ago talking about this. I may cut him off. It's really the Catholic Answers bit at the start that I think sets up where the big disagreements lie. So if we're able to play that, Jordan, Keith, we'll throw it over to you after that and ask for your thoughts on what he's saying here, or what's being said.
This is where Protestantism came from. Martin Luther taught a doctrine, justification by faith alone, that was never taught by a single Christian for 1,500 years.
Clement of Rome says, and we too, being called by his will in Christ Jesus, are not justified by ourselves, nor by our own wisdom, or understanding, or godliness, or works which we have wrought in holiness of heart, but by that faith, through which, from the beginning, Almighty God has justified all men. John Chrysostom, Abraham himself, before receiving circumcision, had been declared righteous on the score of faith alone. And this is John on his homilies on the Epistle of Paul. What is the law of faith? It is being saved by grace. Here he shows God's power in that he has not only saved, but has even justified and led them to boasting, and this too without needing works, but looking for faith only.
This is where Protestantism came from.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that's an interesting video. So let me just set up the question for us. And Keith, I'd like you to speak to this because you've written on this topic for us in a number of different ways, actually. When it comes to the Protestant-Catholic divide, I think most Protestants go, justification by faith alone is a point of big disagreement between us and the Catholic Church. Do you agree with that? And is that still relevant? Is the Reformation still a thing that we need to care about?
Absolutely. And the article upon which the church stands or falls, according to Luther, is sola fide, justification by faith alone. And that is still the dividing line between Protestants and Catholics, and even Protestants and the Eastern Orthodox. It is the dividing line that continues to be the point of division. And I'll give you a very quick story, if I could. R.C. Sproul tells a story of being in his office and being visited by a group of people who were ecumenists. They had believed that they had breached the divide or mended the divide between all of the denominations, and particularly Roman Catholics and Protestants. And they came to his office to try to encourage his participation. Hey, come be a part of this. This new ecumenist thing that we're doing is gonna solve all the problems and bring us all together. We're going to finally, get to that John 17 unity that Jesus prayed for. This is going to be the perfect thing. And Sproul said, that's wonderful. That's great. I want to be a part of this. If that's the truth, let's do it. He said, but let me ask you this question. Is man justified by faith alone or not? He said within 2 minutes, they were all at each other's throats, because that still is the dividing line. That still is the point. If you cannot say that man is justified by faith alone in Christ alone, meaning that his work on the cross is sufficient to accomplish the salvation of the soul, and it is not our participation by adding to that, but it is only through the reception of that through faith that we are made righteous, declared righteous by God. I want to correct myself, not made righteous, but declared righteous by God, a forensic declaration, legal declaration of being declared righteous by God. It is only through faith and not by our works. If we cannot say that, then we have a different gospel. And that is the message that's the message that continues to be relevant for the Protestant Reformation.
Right, yeah. I think that's very interesting, and that's always been what I've heard, and I agree with that. I suppose my question, I think a follow-up question on that is, what is the Catholic position as you understand it, at least? I'm not invited you here primarily as an expert on Catholicism, but I'm sure you're relatively aware of it, because they seem to sort of get close to that line. They they'll go, well, it's kind of faith, and it's faith that isn't alone, which I think again you'd agree with, and sometimes they seem to get really close to a Protestant understanding. But there's probably a couple of points there where we go, no, this is definitive, and this is where that real distinction lies. How do you see that distinction actually being manifested? Like, what's their point of disagreement?
I think the thing that we need to recognize right away, and this is important because just this past weekend, I preached a sermon called The Sufficiency of Grace. And I talked about the history of the Reformation, what brought about the Reformation. It was a historical sermon, quite different from what I usually do, because I normally preach expository sermons. This was more looking at history and how has history played out in this event. And I always post a picture of my notes. It's sort of a thing that I do. It's kind of a long story as to why I do that. But I post my notes online. They're a little creative looking and get a lot of response from that. And I had quite a few Roman Catholics attack what I had written in my notes, and I put it out there, so I'm opening myself up to criticism, because I had referenced the Council of Trent, specifically Canon 24, which says that if a man says that his works are merely the fruit of his justification and not the cause of the increase of his justification, let him be anathema. Basically saying that our works do contribute to the increase of our justification, that our works are necessary. And one person said, well, you've never read all the canons of Trent because Canon 1 says you're wrong. Canon 1 does say that the Roman Catholic Church does anathematize anyone who would say they are saved by their works. So it is true that the Roman Catholic Church does not believe in justification by works. But what they do believe is that the grace received must be increased through our works, through cooperation with that grace. And therefore it is by grace, but not by grace alone. And therefore the Protestant doctrine of sola gratia is not truly affirmed in the Roman Catholic faith. It is grace plus what we do, not grace alone. And so, and for those who don't know the history of the Council of Trent, the Council of Trent was the Counter-Reformation council. After the writings of Luther and others had made waves throughout Europe, the Catholic Church had to respond. And so they responded with the Council of Trent. And the anathemas of the Council of Trent clearly call into condemnation those who would hold a justification by faith alone and justification ultimately through grace or by grace alone. And so those dividing lines are still there. They're still upheld by the Roman Catholic Church. Trent has never been put aside or repudiated. It continues to stand as dogma and legal doctrine today.
Yeah, and ultimately, I suppose, the reality is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when it's Catholic dogma, which it is, it's not just teaching, it's dogma, that means a couple of things. It means, number one, it's unchangeable, and number two, that you're anathema if you're outside of that, at least in the official sense. Is that right?
Yes, and that's the difference between... There are different ways to do theology, and I don't want to take us down too big of a road, but there's what we call biblical theology, which is where we would say the theology of Genesis or the theology of Exodus. That's what's coming out of the text. Then when that is put together into a system, we call that systematic theology, right? And then when we look at that historically, how has this historically developed? We call that historical theology. But then there is dogmatic theology. Dogmatic theology is when a group says, this is what we affirm and believe. And if you don't believe this, then you're wrong. That's where it becomes dogma. And Roman Catholic theology becomes dogma. They have said, this is it. And if you disagree with us, you are outside of the faith. And so that's very much where they are. And other groups have dogmas. I mean, Calvinists have dogma, things that we believe are true. And we say, if you're a Calvinist, these are the things that you believe. So it's not wrong to be dogmatic. It's just you are staking your position and saying, this is it. This is dogma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do they have a different, Stephen, I'll give you the next question after this, but one more from me. Do they have a different view of what they mean by justification as well? So it's not just the faith alone portion, it's the being justified bit also is very distinct, because in the Protestant understanding, as you said at the start, this is a legal declaration made by God that you are in right standing with Him, that the ledger has been wiped clean, and it goes into things like imputation of our sins imputed to Christ, His righteousness imputed to us. What's their understanding of justification then?
Well, this is there's an important historical component to this, because when we deal with even what the word justification meant as it was translated into Latin, and then later when the reformers went back to the original Greek to see what justification meant in the original language, it comes from the dikaio root, which is the idea of righteousness. And so, does it mean to become righteous, or does it mean to be declared righteous? And within Roman Catholicism, it is a becoming righteous. And they make an argument that sounds reasonable. They say, if God declares us righteous and we're not righteous, then that's legal fiction. Or another way of saying that's a lie. If God says, Jamie, you're righteous, but you're really not, then God's a liar. And so we don't want God to be a liar. Therefore, they talk about an infused righteousness, an infusing of the righteousness of God to Jamie. Thereby you become righteous through that infusing. And the reformers, of course, Luther himself, having been trained in law, looked at the idea of the righteousness of God, and it was Romans 1, 16 and 17 that really was very influential on him, because it says that the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. And he says, well, okay, wait a minute. It's faith from first to last. That's what that means. The righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. And he said, okay, it's faith from beginning to end. Why is it faith from beginning to end? Why does that matter? Well, it matters because your justification is not based upon you, Jamie, who you are and what you've done, but your justification is based on the righteousness of Christ, which comes from the outside. Luther called this an alien righteousness, and he was basing it on the writings of Paul. When Paul says, I stand having a righteousness not of my own, which comes from the law, but a righteousness which comes through faith in Jesus Christ, the righteousness of God, which comes by faith. That righteousness is, as you said, imputed, meaning it is charged to our account, credited to us as if it were ours, and thereby it's not a legal fiction, because God can look at us and He can say, you in fact are righteous because you stand in the righteousness of Christ. You are declared righteous because of His righteousness, and that is the distinction, the primary distinction in how we understand the difference in justification.
Yeah, very good. Sorry, Stephen, can I nerd out with one more question here, and then I'll let you jump in. I've always wondered with that idea of infused righteousness, if there is a Protestant way in which we accept that, and I've always wanted to ask someone who's more knowledgeable than me on this, which I believe you are, because I think you can accept imputed righteousness, but also I think is there a reality in being born again and that process of sanctification that we are being infused with the righteousness of God? That, your spirit is, or your inner man, however, I don't know all the technical terms, but anyway, you're born again, and then that grows within you. Is that an improper use? If I were to say that that's also infused righteousness, that they're not incorrect in that regard, they're incorrect in rejecting imputed righteousness. Is that right, or am I missing something there that's a bit more technical?
No, I think you're right, and I think where we have to be careful is on questions such as final justification. This is a big debate that has gone on even in the last, I would say the last few years, but within Reformed circles, there have been men, and I won't mention any names, but there have been men, very high leaders, who their doctrines have been questioned because they talk about things like final justification, and do our works actually play into final justification as we are increased in our practical righteousness, as our life becomes more righteous, does this contribute to our justification? And many people who would take great issue with that and say, no, our justification is firm and solid and completed by the work of Christ. And so that does become an issue. But I think what you're referring to in a sense is what most Reformed theologians and in most Protestant, not just Reformed, but most Protestant theologians would say the distinction is between justification and sanctification. Thereby, we are justified once, but we are sanctified throughout our lives. And the process of sanctification, in the simplest terms, is the process by which we are made conformed to the image of Christ. This is what we were predestined to, according to Romans chapter 8, predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So this is our confirmation. This is what we have been predestined to be, conformed to Christ. And therefore, if someone is in Christ for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, there should be growth in grace. There should be growth. And this is why we call the preaching of the word and prayer and those things, we call those means of grace, right? That's means of growth. That's a preferred term in our church. We say these are means by which God grows you in his grace. You are not more justified now than the moment you believed, but you are more closely conformed to the image of Christ than you were when you first believed, and therefore there is growth. And if we want to call that an infusion of grace, we can, or infused, but and even infused righteousness. I just think we run the risk of saying this is contributing somehow to our right standing before God, and that's where the line must be drawn. Is this contributing to our right standing with God?
Right, very good, very helpful. Stephen, you said at the start of this is not an area of your expertise and that you would do more questioning than asking. Would you like at this point to call the Pope an Antichrist, or would you want to convert to Rome? Where are you sitting and what's going through your head?
Yeah, so I'm living more in the practical side of this as I deal with everyday ministry in what we call a post-denominational church in a Midwestern steel town with heavy Catholic influence. We always joke in Toledo that as Protestants, we get the table scraps, all of the money, all of the influence, it's all Catholic. And so every Catholic school in this city has a brand new football stadium, and every Christian school is, borrowing from the public schools to play Friday night football because all of the money's Catholic. Now, when these people come to faith, sometimes they'll end up in your church. And then there's, these long conversations that happen from there. So, Keith, you mentioned that conversation with R.C. Sproul at the beginning of your talk. He went on to write a book about that, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't remember the title of it, but yes, yeah.
Yeah, I read it, and I'm trying to remember it. But if I remember what he was alluding to was an early 2000s. My timing might be off a little bit, but it was an early 2000s movement, maybe 90s, where the evangelicals and Christians or Catholics and evangelicals or Protestants were trying to come together and come up with this joint statement of faith. And then R.C. Sproul writes this long response on basically why it didn't work, right?
Yeah, well, that is I know what you're talking about. The story I told about the group coming to his office. He told us that I was at a pastor's conference, I think in 04, 05. He told us that story. But the ECL, Evangelicals and Catholics United, ECU or something, ECLU.
Yeah, ECT was it together? I think something like that.
Yeah, Evangelicals Catholics together. That was because J.I. Packer was a part of that, and that was a part of an issue of who where people stood on that issue. So yeah, that was an entire huge movement. Yes.
Okay. So that was 25 years ago. Now we're seeing a resurgence of this now, where, and I often have to remind people there was a Reformation for a reason. That's the line that I use. But it's getting increasingly complicated, I think, in the politically charged world that we live in, to look at somebody who says, well, I'm voting for Trump and I believe in Jesus. Aren't we just on the same page? And so what dangers do you see in that? And how do we as pastors need to be shepherding our people through some of these? I think you're seeing this in more classical schools, right? You're seeing this in political allegiances and alliances. And how do we warn people and kind of shepherd them through this?
I think that there's two questions that I know you asked me one question, but there's two. I have two thoughts on this. One is regarding the political side of it, and I'm hearing a noise. Are you guys hearing everything okay on your side?
There's a little bit of a fuzziness, but
I think it may be raining.
particularly.
I'm actually,
that could be it.
my studio is actually a 10 by 12 metal shed that I converted into a studio in my yard. And so this is in my backyard of my home. And so it may be that I'm just hearing the weather. So I apologize for that. But I do think there is a heavy sense in which people are associating their religion more with their politics maybe than they ever have, and because of that, people say, well, he's a Republican, he must be a Christian, or he's voting on the right side of the abortion issue, he must be a Christian. He's voting on the right side of the homosexuality issue, he must be a Christian, because those moral things become the marks of a believer more so than what a person actually believes. A few years ago, our church went and did open air preaching during a Trump rally in Jacksonville. And I remember several people while we were there came up to us and said, why are you here? Why are you preaching to us? We're all Christians.
You're at the wrong rally.
Yeah, exactly. And I said, well, we go to the Democratic rally too, but we're here to proclaim Christ, even among people who, many of which would say it's unnecessary, but it is necessary.
So what's interesting is we have clearly Christless conservatism.
Oh, yes.
And I would say that we're reaching, that's where our church is reaching people. Christless conservatives, our ads are kind of targeted toward that. Like we know who our market is, right? But like I'm not seeing Catholic Christ differentiated conservatives is like this other pocket that I think is massively confusing for people. And right now, like these lines are crossing all over. So I've got, dads in my church saying, well, should I let my daughter date him? He's Catholic. He loves Jesus, right? So I always go, would you bless the wedding? So these are the real conversations that I think are happening right now, particularly in the Midwest.
That's a terrific question. Honestly, particularly the wedding issue.
Yeah.
Man, and I do have to admit, I am in a much different cultural context than you. I live in the northeast portion of Florida, which basically is South Georgia. So, growing up.
So you've never met a Catholic?
Well, my best friend was Catholic, so I will say my best friend in high school was Catholic. I used to make fun of him because he couldn't eat meat on Fridays, and so he would get a piece of cheese pizza for lunch, and we'd sit at lunch and talk about why he couldn't eat meat. So there was, I did have a Catholic friend, but generally not many. Most people were either Southern Baptists or full out Pentecostals, and so it wasn't my. You're right. You're in a much different cultural context. I wasn't dealing with that. And even now, it's not common that I would run into a wedding issue where we're marrying a Catholic. But I did recently, within the last few years, I had an issue of a young lady in our church who was dating a boy from the Eastern Orthodox Church, because that is growing in our area. Mm-hmm. And the conversation he wanted to have was an argument over substitutionary atonement, because the Eastern Orthodox Church,
they don't believe in it, correct?
They do not believe in penal substitution, and so because of that.
Welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, my buddy.
We sometimes have people jump in, Keith. Hi.
No, hey, this is the Christian Elon Musk. I haven't written the article yet. I'm still working on it, but Michael Foster is the evangelical Elon Musk. He's brilliant, and I'm saying that not just because he's my friend, but because I think he's a smart guy. So.
You're very kind.
Oh, there you go.
Hey, Foster, let me give you an update.
Yes, go,
and
Stephen.
then we'll hop back to Keith. So, Foster, you're in Cincinnati, which has probably got some heavy Catholic influence, and we have it up here in Toledo, of course. And so, Keith was.
I'm in Ireland.
Keith,
pretty Catholic.
And yeah, I've heard there were some battles there.
Yeah.
And Keith was explaining the difference between Eastern Orthodoxy, which is also a problem and a growing movement. But Foster, one of the questions I was bringing up is, how do we pastor our people right now when they look at Catholics and go, they love Jesus and they're voting for Trump, so I don't know, what's the big deal? Aren't we all on the same team? And having these types of conversations in real life, because I would say 20 to 30% of my congregation is former Catholic, or they would still say they are Catholic. They're just now also redemption, whatever that means. So anyway, that's where we're at. Keith, you finish up.
Well, I was just saying that it's not, my context is different than yours. I don't have as much interaction with Roman Catholics as you are, especially having that many in your congregation. We do have people who grew up Catholic in our church. The elder I serve with, Brother Andy Montoro, he was brought up a Catholic in New York, and then he came down to Florida, and after he got saved, became a pastor. But his background with Roman Catholics is very negative because he grew up in a negative Catholic situation. So sometimes with him, it's even harder to have that conversation because he has so much baggage because of that. But ultimately, I think that, as we said before, and I know Michael didn't get to hear us talk about this, the lines, the demarcation lines, particularly the line of sola fide and the line of imputed righteousness and all of those things are still there. And so they need to be explained. They need to be well taught. I think we continue to need to be good theologians, but also showing how this works out practically. What are we trusting in? Why are we doing the things differently? Why do we believe things differently about what's happening at the table? Why don't we call it the sacrifice when we go to the table? They say this is a propitiatory sacrifice according to them. Why is that wrong? Why is that dangerous? Why is what has been written about that, about the priest being alter Christus, another Christ who is bringing Christ down and sacrificing him again on the altar? Why is that wrong? And why is that dangerous? And why does that put us in an incorrect view of the completed and sufficient work of Christ? Those are the things that I think have to be discussed without kicking them in the teeth, but just saying these are the issues. This is why the Reformation mattered and continues to matter.
Very good. Foster, now that you're here, I've seen you write about this. You tweeted on this on a couple of occasions about essentially young men converting that direction, often out from evangelical, squishy, maybe more megachurchy context, heading into Eastern Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and so on. And we've discussed a lot of the sort of theological, distinctions there, really, the theological distinctives of Protestantism and why they're important. But why do you think people are doing that? What's drawing them? And does it speak to something that we're not doing in Protestantism, for good or ill? Like, are we missing something in our teaching that's allowing people to go that way? But is there also a practical side that maybe we're doing that's turning off people, that maybe we need to reconsider?
Well, we're a nation of orphan vagabonds, right? So we don't have connections to our father, to our grandfather, to our great-grandfather. We don't really have deep roots because of the breakdown of society over the last century and a half. Moreover, we are become highly transient and our families split. So people don't have a sense of place anymore. They don't have a sense of history. They don't have anything that's kind of a North Star and guiding light. What you expect of life is really developed in your childhood. Like, that's the norm, right? And so when you grow up with no roots, no connection to anything physical, you're deeply looking for something, objective to grab a hold of, something old, weathered, something you can tie yourself to. And so then you go to a church, it could be a mega church, it could be a Baptist church. A mega church is, you got Ted preaching a TED talk, and then you got the Baptist church, it's Pastor Jim in his little green shirt, and but neither have any history, right? Pastor Jim started that. The mega church started. They're actually proud that this is not your grandma's church, right? Turns out people want their grandfather's church. People want history. People want to belong to something. They want to be part of a larger story. And so right now in America, people, if you look at their avatars, it's like Marcus Aurelius, right? It's Seneca or Cicero, or for a while it was like barbarians and barbarian gods and Norse gods, and now it's Eastern Orthodoxy and kind of Byzantine and Roman Catholic. It's all like they're all looking for something to give sense to who they are, like a greater part of their identity. And the Protestant churches are so disconnected from church history and bad at expressing the difference between standing in the stream of apostolic doctrine and standing in the sort of stretched apostolic succession, right? They're not good at that. I think what I'd like to see churches do more is be able to demonstrate how doctrines developed all the way back to the church fathers, Irenaeus, Athanasius, Cyprian. So I've got a son named Cyprian, a son named Athanasius. I had a daughter named Nicaea. I've got a son named Caedmon. I try to work in references to church history. But what basically happened in America, like, this is a big problem. America's not a Catholic country, right? It's Roman Catholicism is more of a threat than Islam. I know people won't buy that because that doesn't mean you can make those cool little Crusader memes. But those Crusader memes just showed how, like, it's just more of the same detachment from history. It's like more like you don't know what you're talking about. Like, Americans hate that stuff. We're never going to be, because you know what? It would take the sword to make us Muslim, because culturally it's just so different. It's still a very minor thing. I saw someone saying they drove past mosque after mosque. No, they didn't. That place doesn't exist. Where? Where in America is mosque after mosque?
Dearborn.
Dearborn, my understanding is Dearborn now is primarily Coptic Christians, is what I was hearing. But I don't know if that's
There's
true.
a rise there.
But that's, so you got 100,000 Muslims in Dearborn or something
Sure.
like that in a country of 360 million people. It's like, you know, you can have a higher percentage of rat tail and hot dogs. What I was gonna say, what I'm seeing is, like, look, we are a Protestant nation. We were founded by Anglicans, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists. That's what we were founded by, and all that shapes our system of government. For whatever reason, we couldn't make it. It didn't make it over the Appalachians. I think that's because it was that sort of rough pioneer frontier life, and all those denominations have high value on education and preparation and sort of beauty. And we lost that as we did kind of manifest destiny and spread westward. And here we are. So you kind of have manifest destiny lining up not too far off the Second Great Awakening and Finneyism, so sensationalism and the depreciation of beauty, aesthetics, and training all kind of create a toxic swirl that sets us up for where we're at now. And so we have to reconnect biblical doctrine to the historical teaching and development of that doctrine, not creation of it, but explanation, right? And I think that's a big part of what we're up against right now.
Yeah, very good. Just so our live viewers know, we will in about 5 minutes, sorry, we're going to switch over to a subscriber only thing on cleartruthmedia.com, so you can subscribe there. And I don't know if it'll work if you're able to do it immediately and get onto it for the rest of this show, but you might as well try. If not,
you got 4 minutes.
You can do it next
sign
week.
up quickly.
You got 4 minutes to type out your address, your bank details, your credit card number, send us a photo of your passport, allow us to steal your identity. All of that stuff can be done on cleartruthmedia.com, and you can join us for the next 5 minutes. Let me let me ask one last question for this context. So given the theological disagreements, where do you guys sort of draw lines? How do you view, let's say, okay, let me pick a couple of figures that I think that we probably quite like. A Matt Walsh or a Michael Knowles kind of Catholic who is speaking a lot of truth and common sense, bringing some biblical ideas into areas such as sexuality and the political sphere and so on. Where do you guys draw the lines? How do you view people like that? You know, what does a Christian do with that? Do we invite them to come speak? Do we go and hear them speak at things? Do they speak at a church? What does that look like? Do we view them as brothers? Do we view them as guys who need, saving, etc.? So, Keith, I'll let you take a run at that first, if you would, and then Foster, we can go to you and get your thoughts.
I'm careful about who I identify as saying, well, this is definitely my brother, or this is definitely not my brother. In regard to, and I said this Sunday in my sermon, in regard to all the differences we may have with Roman Catholics, I do believe there are saved Roman Catholics. I do believe they're saved in spite of much of what they're taught, but they still have the scriptures. They still have a right view of the Trinity. They still have a right view of certain aspects of what God has done through Christ. I certainly believe their doctrine of justification is wrong. I believe the higher up the chain you get, the less likely is you're dealing with a saved person, because they're propagating false teaching, and so that I think that is an issue. But when I'm dealing with someone who is just a rank and file Roman Catholic, I don't automatically say this person can't be a Christian. So I would be careful to say that. However, when it comes to speaking at our church and endorsing ministries like that, I think there would be a line there. I might go hear Matt Walsh speak. I like his movies. I like, What Is a Woman? I think he's doing a good job of making the satirical point. And I'm a huge satire guy. I believe satire is such a huge tool. He's making the points with satire that need to be made. So I'm all for what he's doing, but I don't have to agree with his theological points to agree with those things. So I would go listen to him, but he wouldn't stand behind the pulpit at our church, if that makes sense. That would be the distinction there.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Foster,
Let me hop in here
what's
real
your
quick.
thoughts on that? Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me hop in here real quick because we got like 30 seconds here before we need to hop over. As I said earlier, Keith, there was a Reformation for a reason. Yep. And the deeper somebody is into their Catholic theology, like you said, the higher up the food chain you go, the more we're probably going to differentiate between what we believe and what they believe. They're well trained in their Catholicism. They're Catholic for a reason. And, I joke, I get recruited to be a Catholic at least once every 6 weeks. Some high-ranking Catholic in the Toledo area wants to meet with me and talk to me about their Catholicism with, I think, all of the stuff that Foster just brought up, because I think they look at me, I'm a younger guy, younger pastor, like, hey, if we can knock him off and bring him into the fold, think about all the other young guys and young people we can bring in with us. I have noticed this. The Catholic Church and the young men in the Catholic Church seem to be more evangelistic toward their Protestant friends than ever before. I mean, like hardcore recruiting their evangelical and Protestant friends to come in and to join the fold. So, hey, let's wrap up this part of the conversation. If you're listening out there, thanks for joining us. If you're not a subscriber to Clear Truth Media, become one right now. Come and join us. We got 15 minutes left of premium.
Yes.
And we're going to ask Michael Foster the important question of, would he let his daughter marry a Catholic boy? Jamie,
Absolutely.
what do you got?
We're also gonna find.
You don't have to go now.
Okay,
guys.
there
Sorry.
we go. That's done. There we go. We're going to find out how everybody became more Protestant. Their key markers of growing and being a Protestant. So that's actually a very interesting discussion we're going to have. So over to cleartruthmedia.com. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Bebo or MySpace watching this, well done. Don't know how you manage that. Clear off. We'll see you at cleartruthmedia.com. And I think are we now on cleartruthmedia.com? Has it worked? I don't know. I can't tell anything. Can you say?
100%.
We're wonderful.
Can I say something real quick,
Yeah.
Stephen, when you're talking about people coming to you, trying to get you to become Roman Catholic? I've had several people reach out to me online. I mean, just a lot. And I know that there are at least people praying rosaries for me to become Roman Catholic. They've sent me the emails saying that they are specifically praying